Hi everyone, I'm Shane Turner. I'm a Technical Director at Abley, and today I'm going to be interviewing Bryan Sherritt, who is a road safety leader that has had roles across New Zealand and Australia. How are you going, Bryan?
I'm fabulous, Shane. It's great to be here.
Now, a hot topic nowadays is around speed and speed management, and reducing speed limits. We know for road safety is a difficult topic for some politicians. So how do you go about convincing politicians about the science of reduced speed limits?
Yeah, it's a good question, Shane. As we know, road safety is an opinion-rich field, and people have different views about different things based on the experience that they've had. And I think that in terms of getting politicians on board with stuff like that, it's around talking to them in a way that resonates with them, it appeals to their own internal intrinsic values and their experiences, but also gives some real life examples around where this stuff has worked and why it's important. So that would be my sort of high level take on that.
And in terms of actually getting a council or a national authority on board, can you talk to us a wee bit about the work you need to do around safety culture and getting buy-in across the organisation?
So it's interesting. I think in the past I've led sort of high profile safety teams within organisations, and we've had a real challenge where we're trying to actually bring forward the safety culture in those organisations, but at the same time there's a need to get on with the urgency of delivering road safety outcomes because people are dying on the road. So you don't want to be spending ages sort of working through the culture of your organisation while you've still got deaths and serious injury that you can prevent on the road network still occurring. So it's a challenge of trying to do both of those things, do them together, and use the examples of the things you're delivering on the road network to actually try and build that internal culture within the organisation. Is an approach that we've tried to do in the past, and that's I think that theory is right, but I guess there's lots of nuances in how you go about that and how you bring people along.
Really interesting, Bryan. And it's great to see that you've got some experience there in terms of trying to overcome some of those issues. Are you able to give us a bit of an example of maybe a situation you've had to deal with where there's been sort of a blockage that has slowed progress?
So, if I think back in the days in Vic Roads, we had a situation occurring where we had a large fund from the Transport Accident Commission in Victoria to deliver road safety outcomes. And so my team was set up and we allocated the work with the funding from the TAC out to the Vic Roads regions. But there wasn't the understanding or the urgency from those regions, and they weren't pushing on with those projects anywhere near quickly enough. And so, through the leadership of Vic Roads, we had a sort of high level workshop with the leaders of each of those regions and the key players within Vic Roads, and had a really heart to heart conversation about what it was that we were doing and what they could and couldn't achieve. And in that conversation, we actually then pulled back all the projects that hadn't started and brought them back into my team and created our own delivery function and pushed on in that way. And it's interesting because you look at those sort of the 13 projects we pulled back, and they were big projects, mind you, they weren't small projects. We actually delivered those 13 before the 7 that had already been started in the Vic Roads regions before they were delivered. So having a dedicated resource sort of focusing on the outcomes, the outputs and the outcomes, I think was highly beneficial because trying to deliver that stuff within the context of what a BAU process is within a road authority can be really challenging. There might be people within those regions that might understand what we're trying to achieve, but it's really hard to get it past those all of those levels and layers within those sort of those parts of the organisation. So kind of challenging. The whole thing around culture change is a long-term thing, and it takes time. But I guess the challenge is you can't wait because, as I said earlier, people are still having crashes on the road network, and if you can prevent those, in my mind, you absolutely must. So it's doing both of those things together. As I was saying earlier, I think, Shane, if you can actually line up the examples of things and show where things work, that's a really compelling way to actually get people on board with this stuff, not only within organisations, but also with politicians as well.
Great, Bryan. Some really great advice in there. Like if a organisation is just in the initial stages of developing up a speed management program under the SAFE system, what would be the 2 or 3 bits of advice you'd give them to hopefully make it easier for them to implement that program?
For me, and I think where we struggled, we have struggled in the recent past in New Zealand, it has to do with the narratives that you develop around that. Because as I sort of alluded to earlier, people have their own experience with driving on the road network and they relate that to what the risk is. And it might be true for them on a personal level, but collectively we know that that's not how it works. And so the narratives that you develop and the stories you tell around the impact of speed on road safety outcomes is critically important. And I think that New Zealand recently we didn't do that particularly well. And what happens there is that those loud voices in the community win the day in terms of attitudes towards speed, and then they influence politicians as well. And then you see what's, I think, essentially occurred at the moment, where we've got politicians not actually buying into what is sound evidence and sound research and a compelling story around speed, because we haven't told that story anywhere near well enough, would be my perspective. That's a key thing. The other sort of key thing also is to, when you do have success, when you actually have got a speed limit in place and it is reducing DSI, we should be telling that story and telling it far and wide. And I think that's a really compelling piece as well. And one last thing, Shane, speed management has been a little bit demonised, and it is demonised by certain segments of the community and of the sector. But if you do speed management well, it actually speaks to and supports other key objectives, things like around climate change, things like around productivity, those sort of things. Crashes on the road network are really detrimental to productivity. And we also know on a personal level how it affects families and people as well. So those things all line up. You need to tell the story the right way. And that's how you get, I think, people on board. And it's important because once the community is on board, politicians are also.
Thank you very much, Bryan. Some really great lessons there and experience. So thanks for sharing that with us today, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you, Bryan.
Thanks, Shane. Cheers.